Coming up on episode 91 of the Behind the Back podcast, Ben and I preview the NBA Finals. But first, we take a look at the New York Knicks and offer our takes on the Tom Thibodeau firing. And then we go into the NBA Finals matchup and break down, do we think Indiana has a chance against this dominant OKC team? Well, stay tuned and listen to our takes here. And then after that, we pivot over to talk some football. The Eagles and the Niners made a trade for Bryce Huff. So we talk about, what it means for both sides, how it's kind of how we think it might be a win-win for both parties. And then we take a look at the OTAs, any little offseason news that we have to bring for both the Eagles and the Niners. So with that being said, y'all, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan-Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet. Reds, Ben, how are you, my brother? How are you feeling today?
I'm finally over that cold. I'm feeling a lot better. I sound like my normal self. I have my energy back. So, not a worry in the world. I'm feeling really good.
That's good. Yeah, over the weekend, I got to see this man play, be in his element and play on the drums in downtown Sac this weekend. It was a really awesome show, really good time.
It was.
Yeah, it was good seeing you back on the drums. You looked at home, brother. How was that?
Dude, music and sports are two things that just keep my clock ticking, and it's very much so my element, sitting back behind a drum kit, being involved in music. So I loved it. I loved everybody that came out. Shout out you, Chad, Delia, obviously my girl Daniela. It was a wonderful time.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. All right, so as you guys heard in the intro, we got a lot of juicy stuff to talk about today. Obviously, we're going to talk about the NBA Finals, which are coming up, and making a prediction. But we kind of wanted to talk about some of the aftermath of the conference finals matchups. So we wanted to start in the East with the Knicks and the Pacers. And obviously, the Pacers are facing the Thunder in the NBA Finals. But we're going to look at this from the New York side of things because some big news happened with the Knicks today. And the Knicks let go of Tom Thibodeau, their head coach. And there's a lot of debate sparking with the conversation of Thibodeau, and I think you and I are going to express both sides pretty fairly here. But there was a lot of discourse. I was listening to like the Zach Lowe podcast, and he's like, he's like, I expect Tibbs to be back. And then I'm listening to other podcasts, and they're like, oh no, Tibbs was going to be gone anyway. So it was interesting to hear some of the discourse, and you hear it with Brunson and then Hart say good things about him, and it kind of felt like maybe they overreacted a little bit. But I want to start with you, and I want your initial take on the Tibbs fire. And do you think this was just an unnecessary move given the fact that they were one of the Final Four teams? Does that bother you a bit? What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you make a Final Four, there should be no realm of possibility to lose your job as a head coach, especially when game one, you weren't the one out on the court blowing a 20-point lead. There was just so many factors to this Indiana series that was like not really Tibbs' fault. But where he was, at fault, and we had this conversation many times, many years now, is he abuses his starters. He doesn't use his bench. He doesn't, and so one thing I noticed there during the series is like he started kind of dipping into his bench a little bit more and trusting those guys. And obviously the games where he trusted those guys a little bit more, they were able to get wins in. So I felt like Tibbs kind of grew in that series, at least when it comes to his postseason approach. But man, like to think a guy who was brought in years ago when this franchise was absolutely nothing. It was in shambles for many years straight. They bring him in. He changes the culture. He brings them back to, some winning ways, finds success, and establishes an identity for the team. It's mind-boggling to me that he's lost his job at this point. It feels very Mike Brown coded.
I guess the thinking behind this, because this is interesting too, with this Knicks playoff run, because they were this playoff run was really even for them. They went 10-8 in the 18 games they played. They had a point differential of exactly 0. So it wasn't like they were surviving and getting the point differential was not on their side. It was even the whole time for them, and they beat Boston. Obviously, they were going to beat Boston. It looked like, even with Jason Tatum before the injury, and they beat the Pistons, and they were upstart, and the Pistons were happy to be there, but they had enough energy to take them out too. So they faced good teams along the way, and I would argue that they had a tougher path than the Pacers did to get to the finals. So this would be, I think it is going to definitely be looking like a missed opportunity. But I but I'm also in the boat, because I talked about this last week. I was like, there would probably be the possibility of them exploring getting rid of Tibbs, or thinking whether or not he's the guy moving forward. I just think that all of Tibbs' teams that you see, even if he's grown a tiny bit, he's still it's a results driven league. And I wonder why I wonder why because do they have a plan? That's going to be the biggest question. Does Leon Rose have a plan all ready to go? Because people could obviously, the first name people would throw out would be Mike Malone, right? But he is very much from that same ilk as Tom Thibodeau in terms of how he likes to play his guys and how intense he is. So if they're concerned about getting a new voice or a new style in the locker room, would Mike Malone be the right guy? And then if that's not the case, then you turn to all these other options, which are a bunch of unknowns. So it's an interesting situation that the Knicks are in. I wonder if, because given the state of the Eastern Conference right now, and if they kept this core together, if they ran it back with the exact same team, they probably will find a very, very similar level of success. They would still be a playoff team. Their style of play wasn't this offensive, scheme that Thibodeau was drawing up. It was a lot of ISO and, hey, we're gonna, beat you on defense and then win our isolation plays and make it ugly, and that's how we win ball games. So I don't know. This was it was definitely a weird response to them losing. But I also, I heard there was rumblings that, Thibodeau was already going to be let go prior to the playoffs anyway, in terms of like that decision was kind of already made in the front office. So I guess even if they weren't going to let the rose-colored glasses of making it as far as they did and having the success over the past few seasons, I guess make this, prevent them from making this decision. So it was definitely interesting for sure.
Yeah, I just, I have these flashbacks of the Mike Brown thing. And honestly, this season, Mike Brown kicked it off. Then it was followed by Taylor Jenkins from Memphis, right? And then after that, it was Mike Malone from Denver. And now here we are with a Final Four team firing their head coach. So it again, I'm crying out here asking, is it, are players too soft at this point? Like, there was rumblings of Catton and Tibbs not getting along. Well, if that's the case, like that's one player. All the other guys said they love Tibbs. Tibbs is great. So does one player really have that much, that much say in the team, especially a guy who just got there? And then you gotta, you beg the question of, well, how much influence did Sabonis or another player have on Mike Brown's firing? How much did that happen with Denver, with Memphis? Like, I'm wondering at this point, and I'm feeling, I'm not necessarily wondering, I'm feeling like this is very much a player league at this point. It's always been discussed like, well, coaches are always going to be the ones who fall on the sword, and they're going to take the first blow. It's just how it is, and I get that, right? But now it's like, you have a dude who went to the Eastern Conference Finals and played a team with all the momentum in the world, fell short, but led his team to 2 straight years of 50-plus wins for the first time in 30-plus years. And he's sitting on his couch at home collecting money. It's kind of, it's not checking out to me, and it hasn't been checking out to me this season. watching some of these coaches. And again, these aren't top tier coaches. When I'm thinking of Tibbs and Mike Malone and Mike Brown and Taylor Jenkins, I'm not putting them as S tier coaches. I'm putting them A and B tiers. I don't think they're top of the line, best in the, and even in the playoffs right now, in those top 4 teams, I don't think Tibbs was the best coach, right?
Right.
So I'm a little bothered by this, but at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, well, hey, we're not the only franchise to do something crazy and a little bit dumb and reckless this year. And, the Kings, obviously, they fired Mike Brown. They had a plan of bringing Doug Christie in. Doug Christie is now back with the Kings. They fired Monty McNair the next day. Less than 12 hours later, they went forward with Scott Perry. I'm only at this point focused on what New York's next plan is. Like that, you can't be this fresh off of an Eastern Conference Finals appearance and loss and fire a guy like that if you don't have a plan already in place. That's kind of where my head's at.
Right. And the next question is going to be, okay, do they try to find a coach who can mold this roster a little bit better? Because when you look at this roster on paper, they invested a lot. They traded a lot of picks to get Mikal and Cat in the building. And it's interesting to think that they're the first 2 talked about in terms of, oh, these might be trade pieces because Mikal Bridges has a 5-year, $150 million extension that New York can offer him, but they need to decide if that's what they want. And he declined this season in this role that he was given in New York. And Cat, I mean, he puts up decent numbers, but they had multiple player only meetings in the season concerning his defense specifically. So it's going to be one of those things that maybe this, they took a swing on quality players to build out this roster, and Jalen took the pay cut, so then they can make some of these moves happen. And now the question is, do they want to try and again run it back next year because the Eastern Conference is going to be weak, or do they pivot and maybe move from Towns and try to go a different direction, or move off of Bridges and try to go a different direction? Because now are they in the Giannis market all of a sudden? Are they in the Kevin Durant market all of a sudden? There's teams out there that could see these pieces that they have and say, okay, we'll take those off your hands even if you don't have the picks. So it'll be interesting for New York, what's going to happen. But again, the East it's kind of in shambles. And next year, I still think even if they have most of this core and just shore up some of that depth, maybe, some of those young guys hit, then, they'll be right back here next year when we're talking about them.
Yeah, and that could very well be the case, honestly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the finals. Before we talk about the finals, I wanted to bring up the finals MVP debate. I don't know, for those who didn't stay around to see the ceremony, they do the part where they were announcing the finals MVP before handing out the trophy. And they were doing the whole introduction. And by the time they were getting ready to announce the name, Tyrese Halliburton had stepped forward as if he was going to be the one to receive the reward. And they called out Pascal Siakam. And so Pascal Siakam is the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. And I thought it was a funny moment because even in that moment, Tyrese felt like he had the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. And I think it was an interesting, I don't think, like we discussed this off pod, we don't think is as much of a storyline as it would have been like the Celtics last year, where it was, you got 2 number ones fighting for it. I think it's pretty clear how this is Tyrese's team. With that being the case, do you think that he should have won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP over Siakam?
Personally, and I keep going back and forth on this, but I think I got to lock in kind of how I really feel. I do think Tyrese probably should have won that award, because when I look at the Pacers and how they play, everything runs through Tyrese. And obviously the reason why, this was even a debate in the first place, whether it's between Pascal or Tyrese, was because of solely, I'm convinced, Tyrese's game 4 performance. He was trash. He was garbage. He was the worst player out on that court that night. And so when you go ghost on your team like that, and it costs you a game, and it makes the series a little tighter, and you start looking around at other players and other pieces, then you're asking yourself, okay, consistency. Who was the most consistent player throughout this entire series? And I think that's where the NBA turned. They looked at it and they said, well, Pascal Siakam showed up for every single game. He was a force to be reckoned with when that half court slowed down. And really New York didn't have an answer for Pascal at any point during the series. But again, you can attribute a lot of that to the attention that Tyrese was bringing on pick and rolls, on this and that. Like, there's so much of a factor with Tyrese being out on the basketball court that's the reason why this Pacers team functions the way they do. So ultimately, I think Tyrese should have gotten it. I think it's hilarious that he didn't get it. It's funny to me because he's going to get one at some point. I mean, it's only a matter of time. He's on pace to be one of the better point guards that the game has ever seen. He's putting up numbers like a young Chris Paul is. So the difference is, he's already making it to a finals.
And I agree that Tyrese should have won. I think because again, Siakam played really well and was consistent and had, the great game too, where he saved them there. But I do think Tyrese had the best game out of anybody in the whole series in game 4 when he had that ridiculous stat line. And then he obviously had the game tying, he had the best moment in the series in game 1. And it was, it was interesting. I think sometimes they overthink the MVP stuff. They just look at the numbers specifically and they're like, oh, the numbers say this, so we'll just vote here. When in reality, they don't focus on who the actual best player was at the time or who means the most, who is the MVP. I mean, Tyrese is the MVP of this team. That's just how they don't, like you said, they don't function without him. So it was definitely interesting, but they've moved on to the finals. Mm-hmm. And now the real test begins. And there's a lot, I've been championing the freaking Pacers, calling them a team of destiny. Everything seems to be working out for them. And I have found it really hard to count them out and to, it almost feels like I shouldn't bet against them. But when we talk about this team that they're going up against in the Oklahoma City Thunder, and, I tried to be objective in both sides on how I approached it. I had to just take a step back and look at this Thunder team, right? This Thunder team is a juggernaut, and they had a dominant season, and the stats will prove it. And if this really has turned into, in my head, a series that Indiana can totally win this series, but literally everything needs to go perfect for them. Everything needs to swing their way. Every one of their role players needs to hit their shots, that no one can have an off night, and Tyrese cannot be shut down. And when we look to the regular season as an example, the 2 times that they played in the regular season, he was shut down. And it's going to be very interesting to see, we've praised the Pacers for having all this depth. And they do. They have great pieces, and that depth will still show in the finals. I believe that's going to keep them in this series longer than people would think. But if there's a perfect counter in the NBA for the Pacers, it is this Oklahoma City team. If there's anyone who can live in the chaos that Indiana likes to play with, it's this OKC team. So it's, as much as I believe that Indiana has the pieces necessary to compete and make this a series, it's harder. The more I look at OKC, it's harder to say, oh, Indy has a true shot. And what do you think? If you, number one, do you think Indy, like me, do you think Indy has a shot in this series? And if they do, what do you think they'll need to do in order to overcome the odds? Because the odds are really stacked against them.
It's funny because I think almost every game is going to be competitive. It's going to be a close game till maybe the end, and then OKC pulls away or whatever. But I still, with that being said, don't think that Indy even has a shot. And that's 100% to do with the fact that OKC is 12 men deep and their scheme doesn't change throughout the entire game. They hit you with their scheme all game long, all series long, and you might find a response for it 1 game, 2 game, not 4. And this is what I was talking about last week. Like, to think any team, not just left at the point where we're having this conversation, but to think any team in the league would have a shot at beating OKC 4 times in a series right now with how loaded this team is and how, I mean, honestly, how hungry they are. I mean, you see how they're playing out there. These are the two hungriest teams in the league going at it in the finals. To think anybody could take them down in a 7-game series, best of 4, I just don't see it happening. And that's the part for me that, I think Indy picks up 1 game. I made this bet with my coworker. Shout out Sam. I'm going to get $5 off you. I don't think it's going to be a full sweep. I think Indy's going to pick up 1 game. I think it'll be a home game because they're back in the finals. First time since 2000. That's sick. It's going to be hype. There's going to be a lot of energy flowing through that stadium. And Indy has shown up all playoffs, all season long. They've shown up for that team. So it's going to be a hype environment. It's going to be one of those things they ride the momentum. They probably have to start hot if they want a chance at winning any game for that matter. And I think it's fair to say they'll start hot in at least 1 game and find a way to win.
Let me ask you this. What if, let's talk about the hypotheticals and how that might potentially change your opinion. What if the Pacers win game 1? I'm not saying both games on the road. What if they start and they go up 1-0? Does that change your entire opinion on this series? Or do you think that, OKC will still, find a way and win 4 straight or even win 4 out of the next 5?
I think if Indy picks up one of the first 2 games at OKC, it's safe to say they could have 2 wins. But I still don't think that changes. Like even game 1, if Indy comes out, blows them out of the water, OKC's not prepared. They're not ready for the moment. They get absolutely, shut down. Mm-hmm. I still think it's probably a, 5 or 6 game series at that point. And OKC is just like, OKC has been surprised a few times in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. They haven't just rolled all the way through necessarily. They've been surprised here and there. Teams have caught them off guard with explosive nights. And they've come back and rallied extremely well and responded extremely well. And that's something to me that you just can't overlook at this point.
Absolutely. I do think if there's one, advantage that I would give Indiana, I would only argue that it's the coaching, only because of Rick Carlisle's experience. And obviously, Rick Carlisle knows a thing or two about upsetting, dynastic level teams with a lesser squad. So I do think it'll be interesting to see the adjustments that he makes and if he can push all the right buttons and maybe get the most out of Halliburton in the series. But yeah, no, it's tough to think that Indy, can pull this off. I do think it's hard to when you have to look on the underside and not just this 12-man Thunder roster in general, but if we focus on just the number 1 on the MVP on Shea, what is going to be the strategy for him? Are you going to put Nembhard on him? Are you going to put Nesmith on him? And then if you're going to put Nesmith on him, who's going to guard, Williams? And it'll be interesting to see how they approach it, because Nembhard played super admirably in game 6 where he was giving Brunson trouble and obviously got in Brunson's head. But can he do that for, a 7-game series against the MVP, who is better at everything and is a much tougher matchup than Jalen Brunson? So, I think Shea really has come into his MVP form and knows now when to take the right buttons, press the right buttons in the playoffs. I do think this is going to be like, I think this will be his defining moment, and he'll probably be the Finals MVP when it's all said and done. But that would be my biggest thing if I'm Indy is I think Indy could play perfect and on offense, everything could work well. Maybe they don't, they hardly turn the ball over, things like that. Like they're doing all the little things right. But then it's going to come down to who's going to get that stop for them. Who can Tyrese step up and get, force a stop, because they're going to try and pick at him. That's, he's not the greatest defender. That's going to be one of the points they're going to try and attack. And it'll be interesting to see, the defensive strategy that Indiana comes up with, because they're going to need to come up with something fancy, because they're going to need to earn all their points. The Thunder's defense is going to make them work for everything. They're not going to get those same level of buckets where you're scoring 3 seconds after, New York scored. That's just not going to happen this time around.
Well, and it gets even deeper than just getting, the one stop on Shea, because look at this last series against New York, how much they struggled with Mitchell Robinson's size and on the offensive boards. Same rules apply, just a little bit tinier in Chet. I mean, Chet can go get an offensive rebound and he can give you havoc. And his offensive tool bag is something that you can't really mess around with either. So I'm looking at all the different ways that this OKC team can hit you, not just, not just Indy, but you as a team. And I'm not seeing a team. I didn't see a team when the playoffs started, and I'm definitely not seeing a team in this matchup that's capable of stopping what OKC can do.
I do think that OKC, the pressure is on. I do think for
Oh
okay,
yeah.
they're flipped. Like Indiana's playing with house money. They're the fourth seed. They shouldn't have been there. There was better
Mm-mm.
teams here. But OKC, you were the dominant team. This is, this was the moment that all of this, all the bad years, all the trading for draft picks, all this nonsense was to get to this moment. And now you have this perfect roster. Everyone's healthy. If you blow this opportunity in this Western Conference, I don't know when it's going to be really hard to have another season like what you guys just had, even if it goes mostly the same way next year. But I it's hard to think that in this series too, what benefits OKC is they won't. You could literally, it wouldn't be shocking to say that they wouldn't have to play Hardenstein more than like 10 minutes a game and they would still win, like no problem. They don't need both bigs on the floor to give
Mm-hmm.
Indy problems, because they could literally, if they wanted to, they could go, five of their guards and just say, hey, we'll put Caruso on Turner and, he'll be able to contest him a little bit with his strength. So it'll be, they can, OKC really does have the optionality in this series in a way that Indiana kind of doesn't. I mean, they have backup bigs, but are they going to be able to offer up any sort of offense, any sort of quality play that would allow them to be okay in the non-Miles Turner minutes? And how well is Turner even going to do in these matchups too? I'm really, it's the more, like I said, I was much more confident in the Pacers last week, but then when you look at this matchup as a whole, it's hard. There's no holes in OKC, and you know barring something catastrophic that benefits Indy, an injury of some sort, um, it's going to be hard to imagine Indy winning the series. I was trying to say, how can I convince Ben that the Pacers can pull off like a 7-game series, and I can't find myself doing that anymore.
No, and nobody will convince me otherwise. Even at the start of the playoffs, really. And that's why I chose them all the way. But this, like I said, this is going to be a fun matchup.
Yeah.
These are two explosive teams, two teams that like to attack offensively, like to be gritty on defense. Obviously, OKC is the stronger of the defensive, and obviously the stronger of the offensive. Um, this is it's going to be a fun series, but yeah, I've got it going 5 games. I don't think it's going to be anything more unless Indy starts this series hot, and they're going to have to start if they want a chance in any game. They have to start it hot, and they have to stay hot. Like you said, they can't make a mistake, and that like obviously the Pacers have had insane luck in this playoff run. They have like 3 of 4 games or 5 games in the playoffs all time where they came back and won being down, I think 7 plus
Yeah, in the last like
in the
minute or
last
so.
minute.
Yeah.
Like there's been some wild crap that's happened that shouldn't have happened. You talk about that luck. Yeah, I was there for them. They're going to need a lot more of it to get this job done against OKC.
And that's where I think that if I'm picking this series, I think I wouldn't be surprised if it at least went 6, because I do expect some sort of craziness. Indiana pulls off something that maybe they caught OKC sleeping when they were up 20 and they came back and just were able to take steal a game. But OKC is just so much more fundamentally sound. They all the pieces work together no matter who's on the floor. You don't really have to sacrifice anything. There's no one they can really that Indy could target and say the only person they really could is Hartenstein, but you also have Chet just lurking in the background as a health defender. So it doesn't really it's tough to see it. I'm gonna say OKC in 6. But because I anticipate some Indy nonsense, and I think that's what's going to make this series fun. I think this is the series out of, when we look at the Final Four, these were the 2 teams that fans were probably hoping for, in terms of if you're asking for the best overall product. So, if I'm OKC, you're chomping at the bit. This is probably the best opportunity you'll ever receive.
Yeah.
when you put, in context, when you look at the betting lines, they are minus 700, which makes them one of the largest favorites in recent memory in the NBA Finals. And I was watching First Things First, and they put it into perspective a little bit um, on teams that are heavily favored in the finals. And he pulled the stat that it was only teams that were minus 300 and that were favored, minus 300 or more. And being minus 700 is an even larger bet, the odds are much more in your favor too. So there were 17 instances in the NBA finals where um, the team that was favored by minus 300 or more, and they are 16-1 all time in the finals. With the one being, it was the '04 Pistons beating the Lakers, and that took the Lakers missing half of their roster, and a lot of nonsense happening there for the '04 Pistons to win that. So that's if Indiana, something would have to happen for Indiana to truly have a chance. And another fun fact about that is none of those series even went to 7 games. They ended. A few of them were sweeps, just a 4-0 sweep. Some of them were gentlemen, and a lot of them were six games, but none of them went to Game 7 either.
Wow. So I will say this. We talked about this off the air, and I didn't get to take any credit for it because I didn't say it on the air. A few weeks ago, I asked you if you thought this, this run that the Pacers were on stacks up to that legendary Dirk and the Mavericks run from years ago. Obviously, Rick Carlisle as well, right?
Right.
And you have your opinions on that, and I obviously, I don't necessarily feel like it does, but I feel like it can be in the same conversation. I will say this: if they beat OKC, to me, it is the most legendary run because at this point, you're such an underdog going into to the finals matchup. You've had so much stuff happen. Luck or not, you overcame all that crap. And you were able to put it behind you, find ways to get wins. You still dominated in a lot of those wins. It's not like you got lucky in 4 games, in all these series. You got lucky in like 3 games in the entirety of the playoffs, right? But those 3 games were turning point games. This was a game 1 in Madison Square Garden that the Knicks had full control over. That heavily could have shifted the series if the Knicks continued to dominate through that whole game. Like there was so many instances where the Pacers were to overcome that. So to me, if the Pacers, even with like an SGA injury, if the Pacers found a way to win this finals, I think at that point it would have to be in the conversation of it's the best run all time.
It would be one of the more impressive runs. It's just so hard for me to like put a Mavs team who was the 8th seed at that time to
against healthy teams.
Against and not even just healthy teams. You had healthy Hall of Famers. You beat
legends.
You beat Kobe and Shaq Kobe and Powell. Sorry, you beat Kobe and Powell coming off of back-to-back titles. They were the reigning champions. They swept them, and then you also beat who did they beat on the way? They also beat the Spurs. They also beat
OKC,
the young OKC team,
too.
So it was, and then you go and beat the first iteration of the Heatles, and it's hard for me. And you're doing that. And listen, I think Dirk, when we compare those two teams, the Mavs and the Pacers, I think Dirk is the best player of the bunch. But Dirk was like 38 when that was going, when like 36, 38 when that was going on. He was older. He was at the end of the twilight of his prime. And, and it was just that. I just think it was a much more difficult path. To Indy's credit, they made it this far, but the way people talk about some of these series, they're like, oh yeah, they beat Cleveland. I was like, 3 of their starters were out for 2 of these games. I don't know what we're talking about. It's not the same. And and very few of these players are going to be Hall of Fame players when they had when the Mavs had to trape through that run. So that's the only thing. But beating this OKC team at full strength, would be really impressive. And I think this could end up being a discussion of one of the more impressive upsets in the NBA Finals ever, and I think that would be a conversation to have for sure.
Truth.
All right, so we made our picks. I got the Thunder winning in 6. Ben has the Thunder winning in 5. We will see what happens. It's going to be a great series. Excited for all you Indy fans out there. You guys got your shot. hopefully you guys can make something out of it for Oklahoma City. You guys finally got back here and a chance to, really have a run here and have something special that something that you were, as fans, were teased 12 years ago, and now get to actually live a reality where you can sustain something magical. So that would be really cool for either team. It'll be the first in franchise history. It's going to be a very cool moment no matter who wins. So it'll be an exciting series for sure. All right, so we are going to pivot on and talk some football. We got some, off-season news, some OTA news going on, and we also have a trade to discuss between our two teams. So that's always fun to talk about. So we'll be right back on the break to talk some football. All right, we are back to talk some football. So this news, we're going to talk about a trade that happened between the Eagles and the Niners. And I think, and we're both going to offer up our takes on it, and we're going to talk about the Niners portion of it and the Eagles portion of it. But let's talk about the trade. The Niners traded for edge rusher Bryce Huff, and Bryce Huff last year on the Eagles did not have the best year in Vic Fangio's defense. He was the first player last offseason that the Eagles signed. They signed him to a contract that was larger than Saquon Barkley's at the time. And, they were like, oh, we got another edge rusher to replace Hassan Reddick. And that ended up flopping. He didn't play a single snap in the Super Bowl. So it's one of those things where, he fell out of favor. He got hurt, and it never really ended up, the right way for him. But, the Niners have a little bit of a connection to them, Ben. So if you want to discuss, the details of the trade, and then discuss what this means for San Francisco and why they would go ahead and trade for Bryce Huff.
Yeah, so the Niners trade a mid-round pick was what it was initially reported as. It was later, found out by CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones, who said it's a 2026 conditional 5th-round pick. So the condition on that is it's based around performance benchmarks. So the 5th-round pick can turn into a 4th-rounder depending on, various performance benchmarks. So the Eagles could get a bump in compensation if Huff plays like the 49ers, hope he will. San Francisco is expected. This is why this trade, to me, let me backtrack. Eagles fans are saying that, that the Eagles fleeced the Niners, right? And my argument on this, and I'll get into it, is that, well, the Niners have a ton of picks, so this doesn't really matter. It's a win-win for both franchises, and we'll talk about that. But Huff, like you said, he signed a 3-year, $51 million deal with the Eagles last offseason, and it was contingent solely on the season that he had prior. Obviously last year with the Eagles, he only recorded 2.5 sacks in 12 games. The best season he's had was under Robert Saleh in New York with the Jets. So obviously Saleh, defensive coordinator for the Niners now. Under Saleh, Huff only played 42% of the defensive snaps, but he was a third down demon, racking up 10.5 sacks and 69 pressures. Based on how Saleh used him in the past, this move is 100% to do with the scheme fit. The Niners now have a versatile pass rush group that is likely destined to generate pressure in the pass and run game, utilizing different sets of players. That was the biggest reason why I believe this Niners team, took a chance on a guy like Huff. Was they saw the success he's had with Robert Saleh. They saw that really good season he had. And Saleh obviously being a major voice in that room right now for the Niners in building that defensive line. This was the last step to getting this defensive line really solidified, not just from a starting standpoint, but also from a depth standpoint. Like, this piece is up and down now. And obviously that's barring health, and we've got some concerns that we'll talk about, as the weeks go on. But ultimately this move, it made me happy because the Niners don't have to give up a ton. He's a low risk kind of, obviously his contract's interesting, but it's a low risk for the 49ers right now, considering they have the money to play with. They were, second in cap space prior to the trade. And obviously Purdy's money doesn't kick in until next year. So, this is a move that makes a lot of sense for this Niners team, and especially for the defense that's, trying to really make a statement. I think the goal for this Niners team this season is to make your presence felt on the defensive end. And then offensively, you're going to figure it out, because there's question marks with the wide receiver room right now with injuries and so on. But yeah, man, I love the move. I think it's solid. The San Francisco's only paying him $7.95 million this year, while the Eagles absorb, I believe it's $9 million something. So it's a good deal, and it works for both teams. Obviously, the Eagles are going to hope that he pops off here in San Fran too, so that that compository pick or conditional pick turns into a fourth rounder. But ultimately, I mean, I'm good with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brandon Graham, they asked him about it on 94 WIP. That's the local Philly station. Just about his time with Bryce Huff, and like why they asked him, like, why did they think it didn't work out? And he said he's like, I've played in the system that he was successful at before, and it's the wide nine, and it's a completely different system that, what Vic was trying to run here. And, Vic was trying to turn him into something that, the Eagles thought that they could mold him into something, and it just didn't end up panning out that way. And again, I don't think it's a bad move by the Niners to listen to their defensive coordinator, who they're putting a lot of trust in to rebuild this defense in his image, like it was when things were successful back in the day. So I don't fault the strategy. That's exactly what they did with Fangio last year. And I think that, the worst that'll happen is he's just not that productive. But at the same time, he has a proof of concept with Saleh, and he can go back to his defined role here in San Francisco too. He's not going to be asked to do anything that he can't do here. And now you get a true speed demon on the edge. He was a top pressure guy in 2023. Again, minimal snaps. He's not a 3-down player, but on third down, if you need to get after the quarterback, he's going to be able to do that. And with the way the Niners drafted, with the way the Niners set themselves up this year to attack first and second down a lot more, so then they can rush on third down, having Nick Bosa on one side and Bryce Huff on the other on third down, when it's 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, it's going to be a problem moving forward.
Yeah, it 100% is. And since 2022, Bryce Huff he has the second highest QB pressure rates in the NFL. And that's just behind Micah Parsons, who's at 20 flat, while Bryce Huff is at 19.9. Guys behind him are like Trey Hendrickson at 18.7 and Myles Garrett 17.6. So this dude knows how to put pressure on the quarterback. And this was 100% the goal. I mean, when the Niners make this trade, the idea is that, like you said, he's not going to play first down, second down, third down. He's going to be out there to generate pressure on third down to that quarterback. Because a lot of what the Niners saw last season, and I know that Robert Saleh saw last season and going into this offseason, was this Niners team struggling so much on third downs to finish the drive and then get the ball back. They could not for the life of them stop those third downs. And a lot of that was to do with the opposite edge not generating enough pressure. And when that happens, when that kind of thing happens, you can triple, double team, Nick Bosa, and then you're just not going to get any pressure. So this was one of those moves you make when you have an idea of a scheme fit. And obviously, like you said, and how Brandon Graham said, I love that he said that. I fully agree with him. The scheme 100% was never going to work for Bryce in Philadelphia and Vic Fangio's system. It was a nice idea, but ultimately it's not who Huff is. Who Huff is that wide nine, and he's going to generate a lot of pressure on that. And that's, something that I feel like we could see some of. I don't think he's going to be that 10.5 pressure or 10.5 sack guy here in San Francisco. If the betting number is 3.5, I would take the over. If it's like 6 or 7, I'd start thinking about it a little bit more, because 6 or 7 feels about right, considering he's not going to see a ton of reps here. I don't think. I think he's going to be that third round demon that we're, really hoping that he just generates those pressures and alleviates some pressure for Bosa.
Absolutely. So then when we look on the Eagles side of things, what I think, like Ben said, the conversation about this trade was like, oh, the Eagles, they fleeced the Niners, they got away with it, they were able to and the reason for this is they were able to unload a contract that they regretted signing. And not many teams can say, hey, can comfortably say we're going to dish out, a contract of 3 or $51 million contract to someone and be able to get out of it next year no problem without it having some sort of effect. And for the Eagles, they were able to get out of it, and that's fortunately, I think it would have been perceived differently had this team not won the Super Bowl and things like that. They kind of get immunity from these kind of moves when you look back in hindsight, because this could have been, in theory, this is probably one of the worst free agent signings that Howie's ever had in terms of production, given how much he paid a
True.
player. So fortunately things worked out for Howie, so it doesn't, everyone misses every now and again. So that's, that was the thing. The Eagles saved $15 million in cap space being able to unload this contract, which is huge for what they're trying to do. And, again, you have a player who wasn't a good fit, who wasn't really happy here. He actually made it pretty well known that he wasn't as happy here as, given everything that was going on. I do think he needed a fresh start. And I trusted in his ability as a player coming in. I don't think, yes, he only has the one good season, but it's under, for the Niners fans, you're confident because it's under the guy, that he was most successsul with. So I do think
Right.
there is a proof of concept there. So this is a win-win because listen, even if it's a fourth, fifth round, whatever, you're getting something, you don't lose him for nothing, and you're getting cap space in return, even if you have to eat some of the contract now. So, I think it's a win-win.
Yeah, and on that note, really, if you think about it, San Francisco's kind of trading him for nothing in our eyes. And the reason I say that is, San Francisco is expected to have compository picks in next year's draft after losing obviously quite a haul in the free agency mass exodus this offseason, right? So those selections could hover around the fourth or fifth round. So they'll likely have extra assets in either of those rounds to trade. So the idea that the Niners were fleeced to me, it's hilarious because I'm not saying you don't know ball, but you don't know the Niners side of things by saying that this is a fleece, because 100% this is, I'm not going to say a brain dead move, but this is one of those things that's like, look, we already have 12 picks that we know about going into next year. Yeah, let's get this guy who we know has generated pressure, who we know has had great seasons. He's my guy. I want to go get him. Rob Saleh, I want to go get him. I think we can make something work here, and we only have to give up really a fifth round pick. And if he pans out, then it's a fourth round, but it's worth it. Cool, let's get it done.
Yep, exactly. So, okay, so then that's enough on the trade. I think that's kind of all that really came from it. So let's talk about just some news. Any storylines from OTAs? For those who don't know, those are just a mini camp. Basically, it's voluntary. Players, people pay attention to which players show up and which players don't. By usually from the Niners' perspective, there's like ongoing contract talks that are disrupting. I think if you want to look at the Bengals side of things, you look at OTA and they're fighting with Trey Hendrickson in public right now, and he's not showing up to those. And some teams, same thing. Micah Parsons, he didn't show up. He's waiting on his contract. So it's a very common thing for players who are waiting on contracts to not show up. But the Niners are not in that spot. But I know there's going to be some guys, veterans get excused. Not everyone always has to show up. So it's not especially given all the contracts the Niners signed in the offseason, you guys are in a good spot. But there has to have been some news, some storylines. I'm hearing some things. Apparently CMC, lost his burst. Do you think, that's been one of the huge storylines? They're like, oh, he doesn't have his quickness in his shorts. What do you think? What do you think about that?
It's hilarious. I love that people can watch, 2 or 3 videos and think that they know all about a player's explosiveness, when reality is he's probably only going 70% because it's OTAs. Nobody actually really goes 100% through the entire OTA, so y'all need to chill. But on the vet note, yeah, Trent Williams is one of those names who obviously isn't here for OTAs. He's often not here for OTAs. He's the OG. He's been in the league a long time. OTAs are something he probably doesn't necessarily, find as a necessity. And that's a conversation that we can have on another day, because I feel differently. Trent Williams, you need to be a little more available for your team throughout the season.
Yeah.
I get that you're on the older side and everything, but at the same time, there's something about getting your body right that I feel OTAs is a good option for. But ultimately, dude, this is a completely different subject and conversation as to last year's OTAs. Energy, vibes, competitiveness is up. Considering the Niners finished the season on January 5th, it allowed for the players to get their bodies right for a longer period of time. Kyle Shanahan, Fred Warner, and Kittle all had good points on that topic. Shanahan said, this is the first time in a long time we've had a long break too. The year before last year, coming off the 2023 season, was one of the shorter breaks we've had. Having that tough loss in the Super Bowl and coming back 6 weeks later, it's never fun having January off, but those extra 5 weeks add up a lot. So guys were itching to get back. They're excited to be back. They're excited to prove that they're not just a 6-win team. Purdy's been settling in. He's been finding a rhythm with his wide receiver room, which is a little bit shaky right now due to some injuries. We'll talk about it. But he's been connecting really well with new free agent addition DeMarcus Robinson. He's also had absolutely zero rust, from what I understand, to shake off between his fellow vet, Jawan Jennings. Where would he be without Jawan? But on the wide receiver room, the injuries right now are kind of stacking up. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk, the ACL, MCL, entire knee is still rehabbing. It's going well, but timetable is still unknown. And obviously, he's not out there running around and catching passes.
Did you see, wasn't he posting some stuff on social media recently today?
I'm not prepared to talk about that. Yeah, he posted something. Let me pull it up, because
it was the Terrell. I think he referenced the Terrell Owens video back when Terrell Owens was forced out of the Eagles camp or whatever. He was suspended for something, and he's like, "Oh, let me order the pizza. Let me call the pizza guy." When people were talking to him about it, it was a weird thing.
Yeah, and then, he posts, "Y'all cry baby ass divas be killing the vibes on IG. Shaking my head. It gotta be an age limit on hating. If you 30 years or older, just post your kids and shut the up." So it's funny to me, because bro's never gonna shy away from talking shit. It's reality. It's how Brandon Ayuk is. And obviously he's doing it from his couch with his leg up and he's icing it, right? But ultimately, he's getting better. He's on the up and up. Shanahan did also mention that Ricky Pearsall tweaked his hamstring and will not participate in OTAs. That's a little frustrating because it feels like he can't really catch a break, and that, goes back. Obviously, he was rehabbing prior or post draft, and then he got shot, which obviously isn't a football thing. There's nothing you can do about that, but you have to rehab that. You have to get better. That took time, and then he comes back and it's just, it feels like it's one thing after the other. So you're looking at his injury timeline and you're not excited. You're a little bit worried, but I'm not super concerned because I feel like he never really got a true off season. And this was really the first one. And so I think there's a lot of, growing that his body is doing when it comes to that muscle growth. So this could be a part of it. But ultimately, we'll keep an eye on that. Going down the injury list real quickly, Jair Brown underwent successful ankle surgery, which we had no idea about. He's going to be out for OTAs, but he will return for training camp. Rookie Alfred Collins and Marquise Siegel, Siegel both had minor flare-ups that led to them missing OTAs. So nothing major there, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But ultimately, CMC is as healthy as can be, was the initial words from Shanahan, and take what you want from that. I think there's a reason to. I don't think there's too much of a reason to read into it, considering his dad says he's 110%. CMC says he's ready to go. He's gonna. This is the reality. He's gonna be in the best shape you can ask for, being a run into the ground veteran running back. All those years in Carolina, and obviously the year here in San Fran, it takes a toll on your body as a running back. So you're never fully going to be 110%. You're always going to have these little lingering things. And obviously with something that he was dealing with all, last season, that's something very serious. So I don't think you should necessarily react too crazily about it. Obviously, the running back room is going to be different, but I think it's still going to be okay. But ultimately, dude, vibes are up. Purdy's been balling. Michael Williams has been a force on the field, showing flashes of explosiveness and power during the defensive line drills. I'm pleased with what I've been seeing and hearing from the OTAs, and I'm excited to kind of hear how this goes. And obviously the mandatory mini camp, which starts on June 10th and 11th, I'll also be kind of keeping an eye on to see how how that shakes down.
Absolutely, that's great news. Obviously the Ricky Pearsall thing sucks.
Yeah.
It's hard, when you invest a first rounder in him and you still don't really have the opportunity to see exactly what he can do. You hope that, come when training camp, when it's time to get out there, hopefully you can build some reps, get some reps with Brock. That's going to be important, especially since you guys don't know what's going to happen with Ayuk and how, he's going to come back. Obviously, the Ayuk silliness is funny to me. I think he kind of reminds me of like the Kevin Durant of the NFL, where he just responds to everybody. It doesn't matter what it is.
Well, the difference there is Brandon Ayuk does it on his main account. Kevin Durant has a
Sure.
million burners that he's too afraid to go on his main and talk crap about. So
True.
I'll leave that there.
That's true. But yeah, so we'll see how, we'll see how he feels on the CMC things. Of course, I agree that like, you obviously want to monitor it given how serious his injuries were last year.
Yeah.
But I do believe that I saw some of the videos. He looks, he's making those quick twitch movements that I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
those are the things that you were scared of him making last year. So he looks like he's progressing in the right direction, which is always good. I saw this thing from Shanahan that said, we're just trying to, the main goal now is to protect CMC from himself and make sure he doesn't overdo anything. So I think they're taking a good approach to him. So that's solid news too.
I wouldn't, if I was you, I wouldn't, and this is you not knowing Shanahan too much, I wouldn't read into that either. Because Shanny has said that before, and then he continues to use and abuse him. So
yeah, that's true, huh?
Yeah, I think CMC is still going to see a pretty hefty workload come this regular season if he is good to go.
Well, fair enough. You guys will need every carry that he gets. So, hopefully he's able to last for the whole season. So
it's a tough schedule, bro.
Oh God, I can't wait, bro. We're less than 100 days from the football season. The stuff's gonna get wild here. So any other news around the Niners before we move on to Philly here?
No, all good over here, bro.
All right, I love that. So Eagles news, in terms of news that we've been hearing around the Eagles camp, a lot of good stuff regarding the rookies. Jahad Campbell, obviously, we actually got an official word from Vic Fangio. He was speaking. They asked him how he's doing, and he says that they're progressing fine, that Jahad's progressing fine, but he won't be seeing real, on the field action. He's not going to be cleared until August for sure. So the injury is a little bit severe enough to where it's going to keep him out of, the mandatory mini camps and stuff like that. And we don't know when he'll be back. He might not be back until preseason time. And who's to say that he'll actually suit up in preseason either? He might, but we're hearing, that's the first that we're hearing anything, about when a timetable for Jahad Campbell. So that's fine. They said that, and Fangio said that he's working on the inside linebacker for right now, and that he does have potential on the edge, but he just wants to start him on the inside linebacker first, just because of, what they're asking him to do, what they're going to be asking him to do early. And the linebacking situation is a little bit dire right now. When you have Jahad Campbell hurt, Nakobe Dean, he's rehabbing, but he's not going to be seeing the field anytime during the first portion of the season, given how late he got hurt. So now we're kind of down to obviously Zach Bond, and then we have Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who I am excited to see. I know, it's going to be his job to lose to start the season. And then we also have our rookie Smile Munden, who has had some good reps there too. So that, I'm okay with the linebacker room, but it's going to get a lot better once, these guys get back and healthy. So, something to monitor. And then speaking of, we go towards the defensive backfield, and there's been some interesting lineups that they've had back there. Cooper DeJean has lined up in our base defense. They've had him lined up as the second outside corner, opposite Quinyon Mitchell, versus keeping him in the nickel where he was so successful last season. And he's also been taking reps at that secondary safety spot next to Reed Blankenship in some packages as well. So Vic Fangio, it looks like he's planning on using Cooper all over the place this year, and maybe allowing, where the cornerback rotation is going to be the matchups to look out for. Are we going to see Mac McWilliams get more reps? Are we going to see Keeley actually take outside snaps? Are we going to see the rookie Drew Makuba actually play alongside, Reed Blankenship at safety, or is he going to take a back seat? It has been Sidney Brown getting those, the very first reps because of his experience. But the Eagles do like to do that with their rookies. They usually let the vets, anyone who's been there longer, take the first reps. And if they impress in camp, then they'll make some moves. I know it's a little too early to start looking at it, but this is what they're rolling with right now. So it is interesting to see. But we already got a fun new nickname for the exciting Whites potential addition with a new big defensive tackle Ty Robinson, also known as the Vanilla Gorilla. We found out that was his nickname. So he's been impressing, and everyone really likes his energy and stuff. So and Jordan Mailata's really taken the offensive linemen rookies under his wing and is out there pushing them. So a lot of good news around camp. Everyone's saying Jalen looks there's an aura around Jalen where he just feels so much more in control with his routine and how he's running these camps and how he's running the drills and everything like that. He's just crisp, and he truly does feel, it's his sixth season now, so he truly just feels like a vet compared to, when he was just a rookie, or even just a couple years ago, how much better he's looked. So a lot of good news coming out of that. And then when we turn to off the field news, we go to our favorite running back, Saquon Barkley, who, congratulations to Saquon Barkley, as the San Francisco 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey earned the honor of being the Madden 25 cover. Saquon Barkley is going to be the Madden 26 cover, and they featured his reverse hurdle. And that stirred some news online because people saw him doing when they were recording the picture, he was obviously in a harness and doing the thing, and people believed for a second that he was floating in the air and not on harnesses. And then they were also pissed that he was taking the picture with harnesses, even though it's kind of there for player safety type of thing. So, but they're doing the reverse hurdle for the Madden cover. I think that's sick. But we will have to monitor the curse. He is the first Eagles player since Donovan McNabb to grace the cover. And that was in 2004, 2005. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, we saw how last year went for CMC, and when you look at the numbers for other running backs on the Madden cover, it's not pretty. It's not a pretty look for how well they do the following season. But I will argue, and I'll say this now, early take, I do think Saquon is set up for another big year, and this was the first time in his career that he had more than 300 touches in a season. And that's usually because during his time with the Giants, when he wasn't hurt, when he was healthy, they were still trailing quite a bit and were throwing the ball a lot. So he didn't have the same miles. And I also think he was the only running back in that list of former Madden cover players to have only had one season where he had 300 carries or more in the total of the season. All those other guys had multiple seasons. So I think there's going to be the argument of, yes, Saquon ran 2,500 yards last year. So how worn out is he really? And I think that'll be something to monitor. But when you put him behind this insane offensive line that isn't really changing, I just don't see, I anticipate that he's going to still have an extreme level of success. Not 2,000 yards again, but he would be the first. If I would believe that he can get at least over 1,500 yards, that would be the most out of any Madden cover, Madden cover winner to do following an awesome season. So it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Hey, I felt a very similar way about CMC. I'm hoping this time it works out for your running back, because that was heartbreaking last year.
Yeah, Saquon's been enjoying his offseason, really buying in. I think that's the difference when you talk about what's going to keep this team motivated. It's guys like Saquon and Jalen, honestly, with how they approach everything. Saquon's like, oh, we're going to repeat. We're ready. He has that mindset of hey, we can totally do this. We know we're something special here. And he feels that confidence. And I think after the Super Bowl, who wouldn't feel confident? But I do think there is something, the vibes in Philly are still up there. It didn't feel like it was in 23 when we lost the Super Bowl and we're like, oh man, how are we going to respond and all this stuff. I think we're going to be even more motivated this year because these guys know what it takes. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, Saquon gets the cover. We'll see. I love that it's the backwards hurdle picture. That's an iconic play that'll live on forever. Hopefully the game's good. I'm still gonna I'm still gonna get it anyway because I love giving EA my money.
Madden sucks, bro. It's one of the worst games I've ever played. Well, one thing, I think college football, you were telling me, we'll switch subject for 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
You were telling me college football is coming out with this feature where now you can't get picked off when the defensive player isn't looking at you, right?
That's what was announced, that the AI is now smart enough to where it won't do some fluky like, oh, you're gonna try and if his head is away from you, facing the other way, if you're gonna try and lob a ball over the defender, unless he's looking, they're not gonna make a play on it.
See, Madden needs that because I can't tell you many times I've gotten picked off when the linebacking isn't even looking at me, and I also can't tell you many times I've picked off a fellow buddy with Fred Warner when he's running the complete opposite way, and Fred just leaps 22 feet in the air to catch it. So, Madden's got some issues to fix, and one of the biggest issues for them is that Madden curse, and I'm hoping Saquon's got that undercover.
Yeah, seriously. So we'll see what happens. But honestly, outside of that, not that much big news. It's been, pretty good. There haven't been any major additions. Obviously, the Bryce Huff trade was kind of the thing. That was a good, good move for Philly in terms of, their vibes too. They wanted to get that guy out of there just because, he wasn't happy.
It's trash.
Yeah, he wasn't happy. It wasn't like he was a locker room cancer or anything. He wasn't causing a problem. But when someone isn't truly invested, not there, you want to get everyone on the same page. So he was a good soldier. He did everything he was supposed to do, and he was a part of this championship team no matter what anyway. He'll have a ring to show for it, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, right. So
I'm just picturing him walking into the locker room with his ring on his finger, like, "Hey guys, look at I got, and you haven't gotten in 30 years."
How many snaps did you get in the Super Bowl, buddy? Yeah, it's gonna be. But yeah, so outside of that, I think it's been pretty good. So vibes are up. We'll see what happens in mini camps. We'll see for both of these teams what the rotations look like early. That's going to be something that everyone likes to monitor early on, because that is an indicator. Who is the team most comfortable with right now? Who do they trust? So it'll be interesting to see how they line up, and then obviously we'll look at the finals and we'll see who's going to come out on top. And it's gonna be an interesting next couple of weeks. But just before we do our outro here, we will be taking next week off. It is the homie's birthday, and he will be going to San Francisco during the week to take some enjoy his birthday, get some much needed rest. So we will take that time. We're just gonna take a week off, and then we'll link up with you guys. If the Pacers aren't swept and they're keeping it in Game 7, we'll probably be talking about that going from there. But we'll see what happens there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, just so then because I won't be able to say it next week, happy birthday, my boy. I hope you have a great time. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So with that being said, guys, this was episode 91 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. All of our social medias for you watching on video are located up above. For all you audio listeners out there, the links to the descriptions are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, review, and follow the show. We appreciate all the love and support as we grow with you each and every single week to make this into something special. We love everything that you guys have done for us and giving us the space to grow and enjoy, because we're really excited for season 3, for the NFL and everything, to really get this going. Because I keep saying it, nothing's happened yet, but it's in the works, guys. Something special is going to happen this year. Season 3 is going to be different, and we're really excited to, bring some changes to you. So with that being said, guys, I am Marcos Conan Agrone. Beside me here, as always, is
Ben the Jarrett.
All right, y'all. We love you. We will talk to you in a couple weeks. Peace.